Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. With the latest changes that Discipline has received, the spec has really gotten into a fantastic spot going into Season 2 with the 11.1 PTR. I know I mentioned at the beginning of the PTR that Disc had some really bad changes, and it was true. And with the latest updates, they've done so much to help improve the spec and get it actually into a good position for both Raids and Mythic Plus in Season 2. So we're going to talk about what those changes were, what feels different, and what is important about all these changes, and then we'll talk about some of the gameplay and what's been happening in dungeons and raids, and what more might still be done to make things perfect. By far the biggest change has been the adjustment to Void Summoner and making it so that, just like we hoped for, the cooldown reduction for your pet is now going to be just a flat amount. You never have to play around cooldown reduction for your smite casts or penance or mind blast or any of that other kind of stuff. You just play the game and you have a 30-second cooldown on your mind bender, you have a 1.5-minute cooldown on your shadow fiend, and you can just consistently play around them. You know what to expect every single time you're using these abilities. It's also really notable that Uppies now gives you movement. And so while casting Channeling Ultimate Penitence, you can actually fly around. And it's slow, it's not fast, but it doesn't really need to be fast. You just need to be able to notice when you have something under your feet and then start moving out of it and sliding out of it. And also your momentum will take you further in the direction that you're walking while you are channeling it. So if you're trying to move to the right and then Uppies fades, you're actually going to fall to the right and continue moving the entire time, which is really good for getting out of some problematic spots. It's also good for kind of pre-positioning yourself towards where you might need to go a little bit after the channel goes out. There's a couple different options that you have at your disposal, and it helps a huge amount. You also are getting some real damage out of your dot effects with a lot of different buffs they've been adding towards Shadow or Pain, and some buffs they've been adding towards Expiation, where you are now triggering damage equal to 200% of the duration consumed instead of just the regular amount. Incredibly big in a dungeon environment because it just allows your dots to be more effective, and you can get back to munching your dots and then spreading them around to new targets, which is even easier when Penance has a hasted cooldown, which means that 9-second cooldown is around a 6 or 7 seconds instead, making it so much easier to properly utilize. And by putting more power into the base damage and healing of your penance instead of relying on all the modifiers, things like Power of the Dark Side, to be up or not to get that power, it just makes regular penance usage a lot more effective along the way, which means in an emergency, you potentially can use penance for healing, or as usual, it'll in general be better to use it for damage, but now you have an option for how you would like to play it. And that option is extremely important when you're in a dungeon environment because you never really know with the loss of Rapture if you're going to need a little bit of extra spot healing, or if shield or the damage is kind of let up and then you can let Atonement do its job. Having good options is essential for Disc to succeed in a Mythic Plus environment, just like having some good meal options is incredibly important to staying focused on your health in the new year. That's why our sponsor for today's video, Factor75, offers just that, some great options for how you can start adjusting your diet and improving your overall health with delicious ready-made meals that are fresh, never frozen, and you can just heat them up in 2 minutes. They're so easy. Their menu is always changing, and they always have 35 plus options that you have to choose from every single week. For me, there's a lot of times where I'll be busy. I'm almost always eating at my desk personally, and there's times where I just don't have time to cook, don't have time to meal prep, and Factor's been so helpful to me in my own weight loss journey and my own health journey to have something that is going to be cheaper than takeout, healthier than takeout, easier to deal with in cooking and cleaning at the times I don't feel like it, and also giving me enough variety that I get out of these ruts. They're great for these ready-made meals, and they also are offering a lot of snack options as well. So if you'd like to get 50% off and free shipping on your first Factor box, use my link in the description down below, or use the QR code that you see up on the screen as well. Huge thank you to Factor75 for sponsoring this video, and let's continue. Now, when you're playing in a dungeon environment as Disc, yes, you got a lot of great options. Shout out to Factor75. But you also have insanely good burst healing, which kind of continues from what we're really used to in Season 1. The difference here is that you actually have to be really mindful of your timings for when you are using your Shadow Friend, your Shadow Fiend, okay? Most of my recommendation at this point in PTR is to play Void Weaver. Oracle is not bad, we'll talk about it in a sec, but from the Void Weaver perspective, which seems to be performing better right now, you are able to just blast as usual with the big healing, but your timings kind of roll into something like using your Squid, then your Rift, then Radiance, and start damaging. And then you have just a Rift on its own, as it's around a 17-ish second cooldown. And then you kind of hold on to your Squid for like half a second, and then you get your Squid, then you get your Rift back once again. What happens with this is you have some dead time, yes, but you also are able to have a really long extension on your Squid, on your pet uptime, which is actually really noticeable because what the changes have brought is Shadow Word Pain into the mix. Your dots are actually relevant now because Shadow Word Pain is replacing Purge the Wicked, they're buffing Shadow Word Pain, and Shadow Covenant also buffs Shadow Word Pain. Now you might think, yeah, duh, Jack, but the big important thing about this is that when you are multi-dotting all of these enemies and your Rift expires, but you still have some uptime on your Squid, this is so important because you still have a lot of healing flowing with all these Shadow Word Pains, and having Shadow Covenant up causes them to basically like flare up in terms of dealing the additional amount of damage, which then gets converted into healing onto your allies. And when you mix expiation into this on top of it, it means that you're going to be doing really large and really noticeable amounts of damage to targets that have dots on them. And so going into this season, it's going to be very, very important to constantly be spreading around your Shadow Word Pains to a variety of targets, because it's going to allow you to more easily deal with some of the dead time that the spec has, where you're not having your Rift, you're not having your Squid or whatever. You're kind of leaning on the longest Shadow Covenant duration possible to make sure your dots are still flowing to assist with your healing. And then when it falls off, you don't have too much downtime before you get your Rift back off cooldown. And if any targets are dropping low, you'll know that your Shadow Word Death is stronger than ever because you're playing around expiation and consuming those dots early to do lots of big damage. And again, lots of big healing on your allies. This is super valuable. Some of the negatives that we have to deal with right now is obviously less shields. I would really love it if the Train of Thought passive, where Renew and Flash Heal reduce the cooldown of powered shields, stayed or was like baked into the spec. That'd be amazing, because there's a lot of times where I find that just having a shield, especially if I don't have like an instant cast or anything, I don't have a surge proc to push up a health bar, or I don't have a shield available, that would help a ton in a couple of different environments where there's a lot of movement going on. I saw this in a bunch of different dungeons, but Motherlode especially, where you're just dodging tear gas and sometimes somebody needs a heal or somebody needs something, you can't quite get it to them if shield's on cooldown. That's a bit unfortunate. You can use defensive penance here and there in emergencies, and that actually feels good. You also do want to think about using your shield almost on cooldown in between your Rift and your Squid uptime, because when you shield an ally, when they have an absorb on them, they also are receiving more healing. But if that shield gets fully consumed, then our 4-set bonus is applying the insurance buff to them, which is an even greater sort of a backup plan in case somebody takes some extra hits. So you have a couple options in terms of how to play it. Now, I did do a lot of testing with Oracle as well, and unfortunately, it feels like just kind of a worse version of Void Weaver, but not as bad as it was. So they changed something with Oracle and gave it a new talent called Twin Sight, where basically if you use your penance for damage, it'll also heal an ally. If you use your penance for healing, it'll damage an enemy. Now, this is super valuable because you're just kind of constantly doing, damage to an enemy and also providing some extra healing into one target. It's really good with Insight, which is giving you the cooldown reduction for your penance. And so what I was doing is I was running the weaker version of Insight, which is a 6 or 7 second cooldown, but it was strong enough to reset the cooldown of your penance every single time. And then you could just mash out like 4 penances in a row, spread around your dots. And if you were playing like Wheel and Woe, you could basically like penance, smite, and over again to benefit from those big Wheel and Woe stacks. So there was some good value that you had on hand to better, deal with it, any sort of incoming damage. The problem is when you play Void Weaver, you only feel strong around your pet uptime and your Rift, right? We know this. when you play Oracle, you only really feel strong around your Premonition. And most of the time it's Premonition and your Shadow Covenant and your Mind Blast. So it kind of feels like it adds an extra step into the equation. And the strength really of Oracle is like consistent healing, but there's not a lot of encounters that have that. Maybe some of in like Floodgate, for example. There's some trash packs here and there that do. But most of the things that are a big threat are burst damage that you expect, you plan out, you deal with. And it kind of just feels like you're playing around some other additional cooldown in order to make the most out of Oracle at the moment. So for Oracle fans, it's gonna be viable. You know, you could probably get your 12s done with it, no problem. But if Disc is gonna be like meta again, which who knows, I would not expect to see Oracle pushing the highest levels of keys or anything like that. It's just more work, and in a lot of ways, you're kind of like juggling and playing around very specific mechanics in the game to make sure that you're benefiting all the spells, like having to adjust when you Radiance in anticipation of the higher atonement counts, and then have your insights and making sure you're only using it on these specific abilities to benefit from it. You already need to have healing from other sources for the piety and the healing increase, and it's just more of a headache, honestly. It's fun to play, pretty cool to play, but I don't think it's going to be better than Void Weaver, at least from what we've seen with the tuning at present. As I've been doing all my testing through Heroic and through Mythic for the Undermined raid with both Holy and Disc Priest, but from a Disc perspective, it's interesting not having like Rapture anymore, because now we never have to hear about should you put Rapture and Evangelism back together. So that'll be nice. But not having Rapture, while it's unfortunate, it's not a huge deal in a raid environment. It's a little annoying not having the Train of Thought passive, like I mentioned earlier, where you're not having Renew or Flash Heal give you shield cooldown reduction. That also means it's a little awkward running with talents like Indemnity, because yeah, you get a lot of atonement value there, but it's to like a couple specific targets. So to make really good use out of it, you kind of have to adjust who you're going to be shielding every time for these super long atonements. On the other hand, you get a lot of atonement duration out of the, I think it's called Divine Procession, which extends the duration of your lowest atonement every time that you smite. So what happens in a raid is that if you can stand still and turret, you actually are just getting ridiculous uptime on a lot of your atonements, especially if you have PI going. There is a on-use haste trinket that I believe you're getting from one of the dungeons for next season. But basically, if you were able to run with something like that, if it's really highly tuned, it gives you lots of haste. You could just be mashing out tons of smites, keeping your atonements up forever, and it becomes very forgiving for the spec. But because one of the things it does is you're actually forgiven for being a little bit too early with your ramps. Now, this is a very common thing that happens in raids where you're too early and you're just kind of mashing smite over and over again, waiting for the time that you can penance. And that would be, you know, you do all the big healing. Very common. But now it's going to mean that you're not like wasting that uptime, and it's actually going to feel like you're going to get good value out of it. There's a change with Harsh Discipline where you're now having back-to-back buffs for your next 2 penances once you cast Radiances back to back, right? If you cast 2 Radiances, it's only going to give you 6 bolts for your next penance. That's the new cap. But the next penance is also going to have 6 bolts. And so you don't feel like you're going to have to hold on to your penances. When you smite, it's going to feel very rewarding for extending the duration. And that also means you can run the extended rift duration talent in a raid, which means that you're not going to have to worry about this extra second of atonement uptime or anything like that in a raids that the rift would provide for you, because you're just going to get that naturally by mashing the smite button, which you want to do anyway, because Void Blast hits like a freaking truck. It's great. So it's very forgiving in that area, and it's very helpful in that area. The downsides are that the whole thing is built around if you can turret, which is not a guarantee in a lot of these fights. Rick Reverb is by far like the worst of the fights that you had to deal with as Disc. You have a high damage, lengthy intermission phase where you need to be moving from pylon to pylon over and over and over again just to be able to dodge all these like Anzarek type waves where you stand in a position, you get knocked in the air above a wave, and then you have to drop and go to the next one. Like, really bad intermission phase for Disc Priest. There's a number of like high movement fights where you probably could find ways to get around it, whether it's like insane excellent play or more likely, you know, like Spatial Paradox, Rescue, Spell Bop, things like that. which is still a really big downside out of playing Disc, is that you are so dependent on like turreting, and so many encounters are high movement, and your movement cooldown reset is life grip, which doesn't move you, it moves somebody else. So there's a lot of downsides. Mainly it's like encounter design that is fighting up against Disc Priest right now. But I will say there are some fights that are insanely good for Disc, like the one-arm bandit, which puts out damage and negative heal absorbs every 30 seconds, which happens to be the cooldown of our Void Wraith as well. So there's some really good upsides onto it. With Divine Procession, it feels like your atonements actually last a really good amount of time, so you can kind of get all of the stuff out that you want to do, which is fantastic. It's really good. The output actually feels really high right now, which is a bit of a concern. I don't think it's the #1 HPS. There are some bugs with other healers that are on PTR making them look better than they actually are, but it feels like Disc gets really well rewarded for the risk they take on. I just don't know if Blizzard's actually going to tune them that way when we come to live. I would say I'm not really worried about tuning in general, because yes, that's how the spec lives and dies for raids and in keys. It's just how much atonement healing you do. The best healer in Season 2 is going to be whoever does the best healing, right? By far, that's the #1 factor. 75, check them out. That being said, there's modifiers for it. One of the biggest problems Disc had over the years was that if it was too good in dungeons, it meant they were stupid OP in raids and needed to be brought down. But now they've actually finally freaking diverged those in Season 3 of Dragonflight, where the Atonement tooltip has a modifier that says, hey, when you're in dungeons, you do more healing. It's amazing. And I really would be shocked if there was a point that Disc didn't do good healing in a dungeon environment because they have that modifier. Now, I am a little concerned that there's going to be some fights that Disc will just not see play on in high-end raiding, because the movement and like the investment isn't as valuable as just bringing another healer who can do it a little easier, like a Preservation Evoker, for example. We'll have to see. But I think if there was a really major thing that we could ask for from Blizzard and like what to make better, it would basically be a way to make applying atonements just a little bit more consistent. Like, frankly, if we had a Spearwalker's Grace kind of cooldown, that would like go miles in a raid environment for helping the spec on a consistent basis be able to build up its healing. I think a big problem in Dragonflight was that it was a lot of work to put up your ramps, and it didn't really feel like the spec was getting good play out of it because it didn't feel properly rewarding on a number of encounters to do that. Part of that is like burst damage and a lot of things about the overall healing meta as well. But the biggest part is just being able to set up your healing. Yes, it's going to actually be a lot of work and a lot of effort to set it up, but it should feel worth it in the end. And if you don't want to make a spec too powerful, then that means you have to go the other direction and mean applying all of your atonements to your allies so you can set up your healing consistently needs to be a little bit easier. So I don't expect that to happen in this PTR, but I hope it's something that they think about going forward, is like the time, effort, reward for the work to really produce like good healing. I am excited about dungeons, and I don't know if the spec's going to be the best like it was in Season 1, but I at least know that the tools they have, the kit they have, how you can structure your healing, we're not going to be bad. I can guarantee you that we're not going to be bad in the dungeon environment. So very excited for Disc. I think it is in a great position going forward. For those who stayed to the end and are wondering what the heck, why are we not seeing Holy Priest stuff? The date is the 27th of January. I really expect there to be some big like priest overhaul, so we'll see if that happens or not. Anyway, big love to our patrons for making all this content possible. Big love to Factor75 for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to check them out, in the description, top comment, all that good stuff below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.